I was just going to say welcome everyone to the last presentation of our series, and we'll begin with the questions. So go ahead, Michael, for sure.
Okay. So we have an attendee who asked, if you know past experiences have caused you to respond to present everyday stuff, should you allow those past experiences to enter your mind, even though they do stop you from breathing properly and being present?
Okay, so ideally what we're aiming for is to be in the present moment, and noticing that the past experiences are interfering with this current event is really an important thing to do. So you're bringing awareness to what all is coming into this current situation. And so if you can make a little space around the current situation and give yourself some time to work through that whole situation, because it is just all that more complicated because of all the past experiences. So staying with the breath and really noticing what's going on in the body and the mind and the emotion, and identifying how it is that you're feeling in that situation, and seeing if you can make some space to really look with a lot of intensity at what is going on in that situation and how complicated it's becoming from other events that have happened. So just acknowledging that, and again with a gentle kindness with yourself.
That's great. Our next question is, I'm wondering if in the future you'd be able to expand on the cognitive filter part of your lecture. Perhaps a handout would work if time is too short, or you might suggest some reading material about cognitive filter.
Okay, that's a really important question, and we talked a lot about cognitive filters last time, and we're going to talk about them again this week. And the cognitive filters are errors in cognition, for example, that we have developed over time. So an example would be catastrophizing. So, for example, if an event occurs and in our mind we say it's the worst event in the world, the world is going to end because this event happened. And what's important is to actually explore, is this true? Is this in touch with reality? And so one book that I can recommend, it is a workbook, and it deals with cognitive behavioral therapy, and it helps people to identify their cognitive errors. And so Tanya and I looked it up on the internet, and it is called the Feeling Good Handbook, and it's written by David Burns. And I know it's probably available through Amazon and many other sources, but it helps people work through their thought processes and identify objectively what their cognitive errors are, and how these cognitive errors tend to cause us a lot of distress if we're not familiar with them. So that's one workbook. There are several others that we found on the internet dealing with the cognitive filters. So I think it's really an important thing to do, is to look at these things with a gentle kindness.
Right, and finally, we received a question about the yoga, and in particular, they're wondering whether power yoga, or yoga movements where you're exerting yourself very strenuously, can they provide mindfulness as effectively as gentle or restorative yoga?
I kind of think not. I think that the important part of the mindfulness yoga is being in the present moment and noticing what's going on in the body. If there's a tendency to get into the power of it, sometimes in extreme exercise, we actually numb out because we have to numb out in order to carry on with the extreme exercise. So that mindfulness yoga and the mindfulness practice is about being in the present moment and noticing what's going on in every aspect of the being, in the mind, the body, the emotion, identifying those subtle nuances and taking the time to do it. So I think probably a slower type of movement is easier to do that in, although I'm sure if you train yourself to really attend to what's going on, then you could probably work up to faster movements, but to begin with, I think it's important to learn with the slower movements.
Okay, well, those are the questions that we've received so far, so I guess we'll proceed proceed with the presentation for today.
Okay, so today we're talking about communication, and communication is often a source of great distress for many people. And what I'd like to do is begin with the first slide is, my goodness, the slide won't seem to advance. Okay, questions. The communication. So the first and the most important communication that we have is with ourselves. And so it's about exploring this voice in the head, this inner dialogue that constantly is critiquing exactly what is going on in our lives and every aspect of our lives. And so that communication is primarily with ourselves, and it's the most important of all. So noticing how we speak to ourselves in situations. What do we say to ourselves? Are we being encouraging and helpful? Are we looking in the mirror and saying, you look really fat and ugly today, and I don't know what I'm going to do with you? Or are we looking in the mirror and saying, oh, well, I look okay. I can manage to get through the day today. I'm doing fine. And so examining this inner dialogue, this critique that we have, this constant ongoing critique of ourselves, and getting in touch with that, noticing what we say to ourselves in a given situation. Are we supportive of what we're doing? Are we helpful to ourselves? Or are we yelling at ourselves and being very unkind to ourselves? So this inner dialogue is the very most important communication that we will ever have, because we cannot communicate with another person if we are yelling at ourselves for doing something wrong or looking a certain way or not doing something right or perfectly. So it's really, really important for us to explore what this inner dialogue is about and what we say to ourselves. And it forms the foundation of all the conversations that we have, so that if we beat ourselves up a lot and we are really mean to ourselves, then that kind of communication tends to extend to all the people that we talk to. So I'd invite everyone to do a very detailed exploration of what it is we say to ourselves in any given situation, and see if we can address this voice in the head and see where it comes from and how we might soften it and how we might be a bit more supportive of ourselves. Beginning there is always a good first step. And then this is our slide. So these are people lifting someone from the operating room table, and that is why we lift on 3. And so they dropped the patient because no one was attending to what was being said. So this is how often we communicate with others. And what I'd like to spend a few moments on is just exploring this slide, because talking with another person is exceedingly difficult. It is exceedingly difficult. So what happens is we say something, what I mean, and we put a message out there, but it goes through our internal dialogue. In very real sense, it goes through a cascading waterfall of our thoughts and beliefs and our ideas about the world, and it goes across as the message. And then it goes across by speaking or writing or drawing or television or some other way, and it goes to the ears of the person who is hearing. Now that person also hears through their own cascading waterfall of all their thoughts and all their beliefs and all their ideas about the world, and then through all of that they understand something which is said. But the problem often is that we hear through our own cascading waterfall of attitudes and beliefs, and people speak through that cascading waterfall of attitudes and beliefs. And so because of all of those issues, it becomes increasingly difficult to get a message across. And it's pretty hard to get out what you mean and have the person understand what you mean. It's exceedingly difficult. And so what we can do for ourselves is try and spend a bit of time in actually getting in touch with the message that we are sending and really understanding what it is we're trying to say to the other person. So when you think about it, I often think about the communication as imagining that people are sitting with a blanket over their head and they're speaking through the blanket to another person who's hearing with a blanket over their head. And so it gives a better understanding of why it's so difficult to actually get across a message, is that people often are unclear about what they're saying because they're speaking through their attitudes and beliefs, and people are not understanding because they're understanding through their own attitudes and beliefs. So I'll give you an example of a difficult communication. I spoke to a friend of mine recently, and I mentioned something that had happened in my life, and she heard my comment through her beliefs or through low self-esteem. So she said, well, I told you that a long time ago, and you must think I'm stupid because you didn't listen to me. And it just shocked me because I had no idea that I had offended her like that, and I never ever thought she was stupid. But I've been thinking about it over the week, and what I realized is that she is hearing that message through her filter of low self-esteem. And so she took what I was saying personally and personalized it to her situation. And so that happens a million times a day for all of us in our communication situations. So let's look a little bit about what we can do about these situations to get across a message that's clear. So the first thing is to realize that 85% of communication is nonverbal. So it includes the facial expression, your body positioning, your muscle tone, your breathing, your tempo, your voice tone, so that it's a nonverbal expression. So it's not even the words that are coming out of my mouth. It's the way in which I'm saying it is what you're reading. So if, for example, you were speaking to someone who had inconsistency between the verbal communication and the nonverbal communication, you would tend to believe the nonverbal. So if someone, for example, had their arms crossed and was tapping their feet on the floor and said, I'm not in a rush, it's okay, you can take all the time you want, you would believe the nonverbal because it's inconsistent with the verbal. So that's an important thing to remember. Just excuse me just a sec. Okay, so this person with his arms crossed is basically saying, I'm close to what you are saying, or else maybe he's cold or she's cold. But it's a closing off of oneself to what's being said. And it's quite a powerful indicator is, I don't want to hear what you're saying, or I'm threatened by what you're saying somehow. It's something blocking the communication, and it's quite a loud and clear message. So when people communicate, what they're trying to do, or what we're all trying to do, is get our needs met. And what we need to do is really identify clearly what our needs are. And sometimes it's difficult for us to get our needs met if we don't really know what it is that we need or want from the other person. And so looking at this exploration is important in knowing what it is we feel and what it is we're asking of the other person. And so this takes a fair bit of introspection to look within to see what it is that we need from the other person. Now, there's some strategies of communication that have emerged in our society, basically, and they're generally a part of all of us, and they're a part of all of us at all times, and it just depends. Sometimes we have a primary way of communicating, and sometimes we have our favorite strategy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about these strategies. The first one is placator, and it basically is a term. And so what the words would say is that whatever you want is okay with me. I'm just here to please you. my body language is that I feel pretty helpless, is that I really don't have a say in what's going on here. And the inside feelings are I feel like nothing. I'm dead without you. I'm worthless, so I need you to stay with me. So that's one type of communication that can occur and sometimes does enter into our strategies. And so what's important is to be honest with ourselves and really look and see, do we ever communicate like that? And sometimes you might, if sometimes at work or in a situation where it really doesn't matter what happens, it's just easier to say, well, whatever you want is fine with me. I'm just going to live with the decision. I'm not going to get too worried about it. And so in the situation of work, sometimes that's okay to do. Then another strategy might be a blamer, is someone who disagrees all the time with everyone, and basically the words are, you never do anything right, what's the matter with you? And the body language is blaming other people. I'm the boss around here, everyone should listen to me. And inside, the person often feels very lonely and unsuccessful and communicates like this in order to get that need met, although probably not effectively. So sometimes we might do that. Sometimes we might get really angry with our kids or someone else and blame them for doing something wrong. So these are strategies that sometimes emerge in our lives. Another one is the computer, is the person who is so completely reasonable, they have no emotion at all associated with what they're saying. The body language is calm, cool, collected, but inside the person often would feel really very vulnerable and very, very unhappy and vulnerable. And so this computer strategy is a way of actually covering up the internal feelings of what's going on. And then the distractor is another type of communication. So a distractor would be someone who just takes off in another direction and ignores whatever is going on in the situation. The words are irrelevant, they make no sense, and the body language is twisted all over the place, angular, off someplace else. And inside, that person may feel that no one cares and there's no place in the world for me. And so, again, I want to just emphasize that sometimes these strategies come up in all of our communications. And sometimes we might find ourselves being the distractor, is that, oh my goodness, this looks like a really dicey situation. I'm going to change the topic to something else and try and get everyone's mind off of it. And sometimes the coping or the strategies work just fine. Sometimes they're okay. In a situation where it's not that important, it might be a good idea to distract everyone from the issue at hand. And then the last kind of communication is the communication that we're really hoping to achieve, and it's called a leveler. It's actually words that represent the truth for me at that moment in time, and noticing what my body language is, that it's consistent with the verbal message, and inside feeling good about myself and expressing my needs and asking for what I want. So this kind of communication is generally the most effective in situations where we need to get our needs met. Now the problems happen when sometimes we just don't know what it is that we need. We don't know what it is that we feel. We don't know what it is we're asking for. And so in those kinds of cases, it's really important to spend some time with yourself looking within, introspection into how it is I'm feeling, how do I feel in this situation, what it is I'm asking for, and what it is I'm putting out to this other person, and how I'm asking it. So leveling is often difficult because we're asking ourselves to be very vulnerable, and we are saying something that's very important to us, and we're asking another person for what it is that I need. So some of the difficulties that arise from leveling are things that we might say to ourselves, well, I might make a mistake, someone might not like it, someone will criticize me, I might impose on the other person, he or she might think I'm no good, I might be thought of as imperfect, and the other person might leave. And so what we can actually come back with is really we're going to make a mistake no matter what we do, is that especially if we take a new action, it's just going to happen. We can't please everyone. Not everyone likes the same things, and that's just the way life is. And somebody will criticize you. There's no doubt about that. And we really aren't perfect. We basically sometimes can learn from what people have to say if it's said in a kind fashion. And generally, we can live through whatever happens. Generally, we have a lot more strength than we think. And so we can actually work through these barriers to the leveling strategy. So this strategy of leveling and speaking clearly through a direct line is pretty tough. And they say only about 5% of people are real and level. So only about 5% of people actually say what they mean and are asking for clearly what it is they want of the other person. So it's a tough strategy to attain, but I think it's well worthwhile. And so how you would go about doing that again is to actually identify clearly what it is that you want. And so noticing how I feel in myself. Do I feel sad? Do I feel hurt? Do I feel upset? And then thinking of ways to put that into talking, which would be able to be heard by the other person, and then trying to say it in such a way that the other person can hear it, because that's also difficult, is to say it in a way the other person can hear. So what comes up now are some other interpersonal behaviors that arise around the communication strategies. So sometimes, and these are a bit similar to the other strategies that we talked about, but sometimes people are aggressive, so that when we first start asking for what it is we need from another person, there tends to be a bit of aggression about it. So we have to really get out there and aggress. So some examples of aggression are fighting, accusing, threatening, generally stepping on people without regard for their feelings. So that's one way of actually getting your needs met. And then the aggression person, the aggression dog, who is aggressing on people. And then another strategy is this passive kind of person. Passive person letting other people push them around. And the advantage of passive is that you rarely experience any direct rejection, and the disadvantage is that you're frequently taken advantage of. And then what happens is when we're frequently taken advantage of, it stores up a great deal of anger and hostility. So a lot of anger and hostility come with that kind of communication. So this is an aggressive person, the little girl, and the passive person is the little boy. So that the little boy is just saying, well, whatever you want, I'm just going to put up with it. And I'm not going to say anything. But then the little boy might get really angry at some point in the future and not know why they're getting really angry. Then assertive. Assertive is kind of a way in which we're aiming, which goes along with the leveling, is that assertive people stand up for themselves, express their true feelings, don't let others take advantage of them, and at the same time they're considerate of other people's feelings. So it's a tall order. It's a huge tall order. So the advantage of being assertive is that when you get what you want, you usually can do so without making others angry. And if you're assertive, you can act in your own best interest without feeling guilty or wrong. So assertion is actually an important strategy to put out what your needs are assertively. So this is a slide from the internet, but it's a scale. And so the assertive is respectful of myself and others. It's like the middle road. The aggressive is respecting yourself but not others, and the passive is respecting others but not the self. So ideally, we're aiming for the middle road, so where we can be assertive, we can take care of ourselves, and we can respect others. So holding our communication in that middle road is usually the most helpful. And so assertion and aggression are sometimes a bit confusing. So when we're first starting to get out there and ask for what it is that we need, we need to stand up for what our rights are in such a way that the rights of others are not violated. And it allows you to take care of your own needs, and it allows you to respect other people's needs. It allows you to ask for your rights, to express your personal likes and dislikes, and to talk about yourself without being self-conscious, to accept compliments comfortably, to disagree with someone openly, to ask for clarification, to say no, and to express anger effectively and be more relaxed in the interpersonal situations. And so where it becomes exceedingly important for us to look within is to see what comes up when we try to be assertive in a given situation. Do we yell at ourselves and tell ourselves that we're not worthwhile and we should not be able to ask for what we need? So again, it gets back to our own internal self-communication. How do we speak to ourselves, and what comes up for us when we are asking for our needs to be met, and addressing the issues. And again, this reflects back to the question about the cognitive filters, is that we're actually looking within, and we're looking at all of our cognitive filters. We're looking at all these things that we have over the years come to believe and know. And so through the meditation, looking within and seeing what kinds of cognitive filters we have and what it is that we say to ourselves, how it is for us when we try to ask for what we need from another person. Do we let ourselves ask for what we need from another person? Do we value ourselves that much in order to allow ourselves to ask for our needs to be met? So how to be assertive? This is kind of like a recipe cookbook, and really it's definitely not as easy as the recipe cookbook would have you believe. However, these are some of the things that make the communication a little bit more effective and a little bit more easy for when we're actually trying to do it, and it's a new strategy that we haven't tried before. So through our introspective work is starting to identify the situations where we want to be more effective, identifying times that we find ourselves being too passive or too aggressive, and deciding, okay, is this a place where I could make some space around the event and ask for what it is I need from the situation. So it's important to identify our rights, what I want, what I need, and how I feel about the situation. How does this situation make me feel? And then what's often really important is to arrange a time to discuss it. So if you find yourself in the thick of a very intense conversation, often that is not the time to try and address the issue. It's important to allow the emotion to calm down, to arrange a time to discuss the situation, and to actually define the situation as specifically as possible, is to say, I feel, when this happens, I feel this. And so another important thing is actually owning your own feelings. So as opposed to saying to the person, you make me feel really upset and angry, it's important to own our own feelings and to say, when I feel angry, I feel upset when you do this. So if we own our own feelings, we aren't blaming the other person for the feelings that we have. We're simply defining the situation and identifying how it is that I feel in response to what's going on right now. So instead of saying, you hurt me, saying, I feel hurt when you do that. And expressing the request in a very easy to understand sentence, being specific and firm, and reinforcing the request by stating the positive consequences of the request. And so how it is that this would help me. If I feel sad or I feel hurt when you do that, and I would feel much better if you didn't do that or you did this. So maintaining direct eye contact with the person. So actually taking responsibility for how it is we feel and asking the person to meet our needs in a particular way. Importantly, maintaining this upright body posture, so not slumping down on the chair, and mumbling your message, but speaking clear, audibly, firmly. Don't whine or be apologetic, but making sure that you're aware of your facial gestures and your expressions. So making sure that we're consistent with our thoughts and our feelings and what it is we're asking for and what our body language says. So a consistency. So through that kind of communication, we are much more likely to get our needs met. So sometimes when we're first starting to ask for our needs to be met, it becomes a little bit difficult to identify the difference between assertive and aggressive. So sometimes we might go a little bit overboard with the assertion and it might look a bit more like aggressive. And so paying close attention to how it is you are feeling in your body in the given situation that you're trying to communicate with. I'm going to ask Michael if there are any questions that have come up so far through our talk.
Well, we have one comment here from somebody in Europe who showed up a little bit late because they had moved their clocks back by 1 hour. But she just mentions that she found the yoga exercises perfect and a much more fluid way of practicing her physio regime. So she wanted to extend her thanks and appreciation for the yoga postures.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice, particularly that I'm not a yoga teacher, so thank you. That's very, very lovely. I'm just wondering if there are any questions from anyone around the communication, because this is a bit of a difficult strategy, this level communication, and often the problems that arise around communication are many, and primarily it's about identifying how it is that we feel. And so what I'm going to do at this moment in time is ask people to, we didn't do our deep breath and coming into the moment in the very beginning of our talk. So I'm going to ask people if they would take a minute right now, take a deep breath and sink into the body. And turn the mind's eye inside of the body. And come into the moment. And continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly, I'm going to invite people to remember a time when they had a difficult communication with someone where it clearly didn't go well. And see if they can remember what it is that they felt and what it is that they wanted the other person to give them in that communication. And then thinking a little bit about where the strategy went wrong. And if there's anyone that would be willing to share one of their situations, that would be great. I'm going to begin by just sharing my situation that I mentioned earlier. Is in my speaking to a friend of mine, I was talking to her on the telephone, and when I really looked within, what I wanted her to say was be supportive of me and to give me support for the situation that I was dealing with. And instead of giving me support, what she did is lash out at me and tell me that I thought she was stupid. And so in that situation, I made the error of expecting her to know what I was feeling and know what I was thinking. And so possibly a better strategy would have been to say, I'm feeling really sad and upset right now, and I just need you to listen to me. That would have been a more fair kind of situation for her to have dealt with. Or I could have asked specifically for sympathy and said that I really would like you to be sympathetic toward me. And instead of listening to the response that came, which was through her own filters, which then further exacerbated the situation. So this is a pretty simple example, not an important one, but a situation nonetheless where I felt hurt at the end of the communication, and I'm sure she's angry with me, and we haven't actually worked it out yet. So you can see how complicated this asking for what it is you need from another person can be. And the one thing that often comes up is that we fail to listen. We fail to listen in many situations, is that we are so busy in our own heads that we fail to listen to what other people are asking for. And so the listening aspect is exceedingly important. What I'd like to invite you to do in your practice for this week is actually really listen to someone. So actually spend a bit of time really listening to someone. So sometimes what happens is that we end up having a story about the person, and we don't hear what it is that they say because we only hear and we only see our story about the person. So we miss 90% of what they say because we only see the story that we have about the person. So I'm going to give you a poem, basically, which is called Listen. And it's an interesting poem. It's when I ask you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you have not done what I asked. When I ask you listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you are trampling on my feelings. When I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problems, you have failed me, strange as that may seem. Listen. All that I ask is that you listen, not talk or do, just hear me. When you do something for me that I need to do for myself, you contribute to my fear and feelings of inadequacy. But when you accept as a simple fact that I do feel what I feel, no matter how irrational, then I can quit trying to convince you and go about the business of understanding what's behind my feelings. So please listen and just hear me. And if you want to talk, wait a minute for your turn and I'll listen to you. So I hope that poem is helpful for people. I know that it was a bit of an eye-opener for me because often I have a tendency to jump in and start giving solutions to the problem. And I think the listening is sometimes all that people need, is for someone to just hear what they're saying and witness it. And also for ourselves, many times it's what we need, is for someone just to listen to us without trying to fix anything. So at this point in time, I'm wondering if there are any questions about any of our work here this past 5 weeks.
Hi there, Linda. It's Michael again.
Hi.
I just want to share some of the comments and questions that we've received on the communications piece. We had one comment from somebody who suggests an acronym. The acronym is WIN, W-I-N, that helps folks remember how to compose assertive statements. The W is for when you do X, or then the I is for I feel Y. And then the N is for I need you to Z.
That's nice. That's a really nice acronym. That's great.
And we had another comment from someone. Did you have more to say about that, Linda? Sorry, I cut you off.
No.
Okay, so then we had a comment. I had a situation where I was not clearly asking for what I wanted. I'm hard of hearing, and twice a week spend time at an exercise class with a group, and we go out for coffee after. There's one woman who has a very low voice, doesn't look at me when speaking, and doesn't enunciate well. I was feeling very left out last week, but only now realized that I did not clearly say exactly what I needed her to do, which was speak up, look at me, and enunciate.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a lovely example of how often we go into our own head and actually feel really badly about that situation, because it's just so quick to do, is that in a situation where there's, you feel alone and you feel sad and you feel hurt, and really sometimes it's just a matter of clearly asking for what you need. So good for you for noticing that situation where you went into a sadder place when you could have asked for what you need. I think it's a tricky business, this communication, really hard to do.
Somebody asked who the author of this poem is. Do you know who wrote the poem?
I don't know, actually, and I probably should not have it without knowing, but I will look and see in my records. I must have the author someplace. I apologize. I don't have it with me.
Okay, maybe we'll include that on our list of resources.
Yes.
We had another question. Somebody looking for tips on how. Oh, look! Somebody is offered to an author of the poem. Somebody says the author of the poem is Gary Jones.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. That's wonderful.
So this other person was asking whether we have any tips for being assertive when the person you're communicating with is reacting with aggression or is taking an aggressive approach. How do you be assertive in the face of aggression?
I think that I might delay the conversation to another time and point out that no one has to accept someone aggressing on them. No one, not in any situation, not in a work situation, not in a personal situation. So making space around that situation and saying, I'm not going to engage in this conversation until we can have a respectful communication. So backing away and protecting yourself in the situation. So I don't believe there's a situation where you would have to deal with aggression and you would have to make yourself stay. So making space around it, pointing out to the person that we will come back and discuss later when it's going to be a respectful communication, and leaving it at that and having a situation or arranging a time when you could discuss it in a calm and respectful way. Because it's not fair to have yourself in that kind of a vulnerable position.
That's a great response, Linda. I have a great comment here from someone who writes, if I'm headed towards a raised voice conversation with my 10-year-old son about getting his homework done or some other similar matter, we now both have a hug and take deep breaths together. It works very well, and my son often suggests it first. That's a great comment, because I'm headed towards similar conversations with my kids.
That's cute. That's nice. I think that's lovely. And often children are so much more aware of things than we are. Sometimes we get off into a tangent. That's a lovely way to break it into, make it into more of a mindful situation.
Another question here on the other side of the spectrum from the question we had about aggression. Do you have some strategies for talking to a passive person who does not express their needs clearly and who usually responds, I don't know, if I ask what he needs or how he feels?
That's difficult for sure. I guess this probably similar strategies would be to identify when you say that you don't know, I feel helpless, I feel however I feel in this situation. So trying to put forth an accurate description of how that communication helps, or how that communication causes me to feel. So identifying our own feelings. And important to remember, I think, is that the only thing we can do, the only one thing we have to work with is our own situation, our own attitude. We can't control another person in any situation whatsoever. We can only control how it is we're going to work with that situation and how we're going to be with the situation. So we have to take full responsibility for what we can do, and in situations where we can't control it, is find a way to make some space around it.
Mm-hmm. And that answers in part the next question we received about how to deal with someone who's passive-aggressive and not wanting to talk it out. How do you stay level when you want to act passive-aggressive as well? And I guess it goes back to not being able to control how someone else is acting and just controlling your reaction. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think that just realizing what we have control over and what we can do, what we can control, and that is only our own selves and our own reactions, our own emotions, our own mind, our own body. And so actually becoming intimately familiar with how it is that we feel and how it is the situation causes us to feel. And then I think in some cases taking care of not in some cases, in all cases, taking care of ourselves and making sure that we are meeting our own personal needs. And so if there's a situation in one's life where it constantly causes a lot of angst and every effort has been made to modify it and change it, then sometimes the difficult decision needs to be made is to change the situation somehow, so that take yourself away from that situation or stop trying to communicate with that particular person. Is this, and it would have to be a really well thought out situation where you would decide, is this important to me or not? Do I want to try and make it work? Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead, Michael.
Well, we're just about at the end of our hour. Are there any further wrap-up comments or resources that you wanted to point people to as they continue their mindfulness journey?
Yeah, I will point people to, there's a website called MBSR BC, and that website lists all of the mindfulness courses that happen in Vancouver and surrounding areas. So there may be some of those courses that people would decide to take the full course. Or there's also meditation groups called West Coast Dharma. Often at UBC they have meetings periodically where they have meditation instructors that come in to speak. And so that would be another way to further the practice. So those things I will send to you and Tanya, maybe to post on the website. But I would encourage people to continue practicing, because it's a journey after all. It's not a destination, it's a journey, and it's a continuous journey of practice, meditation, constant journey, looking within and looking at all the things that go on in our personal mind, body, spirit situation.
Wonderful. So, yeah, to those that are asking for a repeat of the name of the Mindfulness Center, what was that again? It's
MBSR BC. Oh, MBSR BC is the website, and it's MBSR BC. And then the West Coast Dharma often has talks.
Wonderful. And go ahead.
Oh, and you can just Google West Coast Dharma, but I will send them to you and Tanya to post on the website.